Okay, hello everybody. I'm so glad I can join this policy forum by PWPA. So I'm going to use my PowerPoint. Okay, today's topic is a formal end of the Korean War possible. So we're going to talk about the Korean War. That is very important, but some people might say they don't know about Korean War. Some say it is a forgotten war, or some might ask, isn't that war already ended a long time ago? But it is not. It's very, very important war that's still going on. As you see here, Korean War started in 1950, but ended with a ceasefire, so-called armistice agreement, not a formal peace treaty. So we created a demilitarized zone in the middle of the Korean Peninsula. In that regard, the war is technically still going on, and there are no diplomatic ties between the two Koreas. And North Korea even threatening with their more than 14,000 artilleries in the DMZ against Seoul Metro. They say they're going to make Seoul a sea of fire many, many years. So not even needed missiles or nuclear weapons to make this kind of war. These artilleries cannot be stopped by any means. So it is totally dangerous still that we got to remember this war is still going on. I very much hope that we can first end this war. In that way, we can start talking about reunification of the two Koreas. Unified Korea is our strong hope and wishes. So let's just think about how the Koreas were divided in the first place. It was divided at the end of the World War II by Soviet Union and the United States. At the time, we thought it was just a temporary line in the process of disarming Japanese forces in the Korean Peninsula, so that Soviet forces moved in the North Korea, and then in the South, US forces moved in. But somehow the Soviets, the communists, trying to preserve the area as their own puppet countries. So they brought Kim Il-sung into North Korea, and against the will of United Nations, North Korea formed its own government, the Communist North. But in the South, we don't have Jews to establishing our own Democratic Republic of Korea in 1948. So at the time, U.S., according to the agreement with the Soviets, so they withdraw all the United States forces from the South Korea to Japan and the United States. But as you imagine, Soviets, they remain lots of armaments and lots of military personnel in North Korea and ready for attack. And another communist threat is that Soviet Union developed its nuclear weapons in August 1949. And unfortunately, all the China, mainly China, communized just a few months later in October 1949. That is a really unfortunate because of all these communist forces now, looming all over East Asia. But you see in North Korea, it is very important. Pyongyang, the capital, at that time was considered Jerusalem of the Asia. And Wonsan happened to be a birthplace of Kim Jong-un, the current leader, is the called Rome of the East. Christianity is really, really blossoming in North Korea at the time, while communist China is, encroaching upon it. So the United States actually immediately felt the sense of urgency to work against communism. But in January 1950, U.S. Secretary of State Dean Acheson made an important speech. They called it Acheson Line speech, but it formed a defensive perimeter, so-called defense line against communism, but it's mainly focused on Japan and Philippines. It doesn't mention South Korea at all, as the speech manuscript here. So Kim Il-sung and Mao and Stalin interpreted the speech as they wished, unfortunately. So at the time, Kim Il-sung persuaded Stalin and Mao, and at the time, Stalin was a big brother, 72 years old, agreed. And there's also strong personal assurance from Stalin and Mao. Kim Il-sung invaded South Korea on June 25th, 1950. That was total sadness. So it lasted about, the actual war lasted about 3 years, but it ended as an armistice, ceasefire, as I said. But the war is not a civil war, but an international war in terms of United Nations forces. Command was formed for the first time against Communist alliance, North Korea, China, and Russia. Russia provided lots of armaments and warplanes with pilots. So in the UNC, United Command side, there are 16 nations formed, as you see, a lot of casualties. So another aspect is a first ideological war, communism versus democracy. So the United States role is very important to dispel communist forces in Asia. So that's still looming in the current state of affairs in East Asia because North Korea is now supplying Russia many weapons in the Ukraine war. Today's news said that even North Korean soldiers will be sending to Russia and Ukraine in the name of volunteers. I don't think it's volunteers at all. That is very, very worrisome. Another aspect is that the nuclear aspect of the Korean War. Many did not know that. Actually, the United States considered formally nuclear attack against North Korea and even in China in late 1950, but it was not executed because of many reasons that I can explain later. So the Korean War enemies, Soviet Union, China, and North Korea, strongly felt the threat of nuclear weapons, so that they developed their own nuclear weapons. In 1964 by China, and North Korea developed in 2017 and still developing more warheads. So this kind of structure is now persisting for the next 70 years in the name of first Cold War. So until 1991, when the Soviet Union demised. So during that time, a lot of military provocations by North Korea. So there was a US Navy ship captured in 1968, still in North Korea, and the US Navy aircraft shot down and killing 31 US soldiers. Even 2 US Army officers were ex-murdered in the DMZ. A lot of provocations, but still the United States endured this provocation to maintain the status quo as a second, I said, Hutchison line, US defense line, because it is crucial for US global strategic interest against Russia and China. So as you see, North Korea is bordered by Russia over here and China over here. So briefly, in the last 30 years until last year, we call it post-Cold War after the demise of the Soviet Union. So it is called so-called Cold Peace, I would say. So there are lots of inter-Korean summits to talk about the end of the Korean War, but it's not successful, and also unification ways. And the important thing is the US-DPRK relationship. And the US is really worrying about North Korean nuclear weapons development. So in the 2018 and 19, there was a summit between the US and North Korea for the denuclearization efforts. The final efforts, however, failed, unfortunately. So that signaled the negotiations of the last 30 years. Many experts agree that failed. So North Korea became, unfortunately, unofficial nuclear weapon state. Now everybody agrees that North Korea has a usable nuclear weapons. So until last year, U.S. maintains so-called U.S. strategic patience policy. That is still useful because U.S. said that it is still good for defending democracy and economic opportunities against China and Russia, even from North Korea too. But last year, the Ukraine war began, still going on, and many things happening, especially North Korea developed intercontinental ballistic missiles that fires over here in Los Angeles and New York and Washington. Many experts agree that it is possible that the U.S. could be hit by North Korean nuclear warhead. So my question is, why North Korea fires its nuclear weapons over Pacific, maintaining this defense line in the DMZ is still useful? We need to think about that. Because while building up all the military powers in East Asia, North Korea will develop more nuclear warheads, and their missile technologies will be improved. During the time, there's a possibility that North Korea can proliferate nuclear technologies to Iran and even to terrorist groups, so that nuclear weapons can be minimized, so-called backpack-style nuclear weapons. That's a huge threat to the United States security. But at this time, we need to think about 2 questions. Can the U.S. make a preemptive military attack against North Korea, including a decapitation operation of Kim Jong-un for the complete denuclearization, without incurring unimaginable destructions in Northeast Asia and even the United States? Another question is, can any further U.S. economic sanctions against North Korea will achieve complete denuclearization of North Korea? It's a very important question when you think about. In the background of a stronger alliance of Russia, China, and North Korea, because of this Ukraine war and increasing hostility between Russia and US and China and US relations over Taiwan here too. It's a very critical time. So we need to think very hard what to do about the Korean Peninsula. Can it be another war in a hot spot of the war? No. Think about Ukraine war. It'll be much more destructible in the Korean Peninsula. So I would suggest to think about in the discussion session, how about divide and conquer policy by the US? Divide the Russia-China DPRK nuclear weapons dictatorship bloc. They are longing for lifelong dictatorships in 3 nations. So I very much hope that the US thinking about establishing diplomatic ties with North Korea without losing its face. So let's think about, isn't it about time for the US to seriously consider a formal end to the Korean War by just changing the status quo of the Korean DMZ? That's the first step. And turning the DMZ into a UN peace zone. Then many players should play a role to establish the UN peace zone. But I think I want to get many advices from many experts and young people what to do at this time. That's for our next discussion session. So that's it for my discussion. And thank you very much. Thank you.